The Trucker's Prayer, a sleep story. Let your breathing slow as we travel the mountain roads with a man who discovers that sometimes salvation comes not in churches, but in the cab of an 18-wheeler. Mike Anderson had spent 25 years behind the wheel of a big rig, trusting nothing but his hands on the steering wheel and his boots on solid ground. At 52, he was leather-tough and road-weary, the kind of man who called himself practical. Churches were for other people. He'd only stepped inside them for funerals, and even then he'd stood in the back, arms crossed, waiting for it to be over. But on a crisp October morning in Texas, Mike found himself staring at cargo that made him unexpectedly uncomfortable. A 2-ton marble statue of the Virgin Mary, gleaming white in the morning sun, her carved face serene and watchful as a crane lifted her onto his flatbed trailer. The job was simple enough. Haul the statue from Texas to a small Catholic parish in the Colorado mountains. Good pay, straightforward route. Just stone, he told himself, shaped into a figure that meant something to other people. Not to him. But as the crane lowered the statue onto his trailer, something about her marble eyes, so lifelike, so gentle, made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. The parish had gathered to see their Virgin Mary off on her journey. Families lit candles and sang hymns in Spanish and English. Children clutched rosaries, staring wide-eyed at the beautiful figure. An elderly woman, small and bent with age, hobbled close to Mike's truck. She looked up at him with eyes bright as starlight and whispered, "Madre Maria, travel with this driver." Her trembling fingers touched his truck door as though blessing it. Mike forced a smile. "Thank you, ma'am." But unease crawled up his spine like cold fingers. He wasn't used to being prayed over. Climbing into the cab, he adjusted his mirrors and glanced back at the massive white figure strapped under protective tarps. "It's just stone," he muttered to himself. "Just another load." But deep down, a tiny question sparked, the kind he'd spent years burying under skepticism and road dust. What if it isn't just stone? The mountains test. The highway stretched wide and welcoming at first, carrying Mike through golden valleys dotted with cattle and hay fields. But ahead, the Rockies loomed like ancient sentinels, their peaks disappearing into gathering clouds. As he climbed higher, the road narrowed into twisting passes where one mistake could send 40,000 pounds of steel and stone tumbling into the canyon below. Mike had driven these mountains before, but today felt different. Every glance in his mirror revealed the tarp fluttering in the wind, and beneath it, he could almost sense those carved eyes watching him. Get a grip, Anderson, he thought. This rock, not magic. The first test came without warning. A weathered sign appeared around a bend. Bridge ahead, weight limit, 10 tons. Mike's rig, even without the sacred cargo, pushed close to that limit. With the marble statue, he was cutting it dangerously close. But there was no alternate route. The bridge stretched across a deep canyon, wooden planks bolted to rusted steel beams that had seen better decades. Below, the Rio Grande foamed and roared against jagged rocks. Mike stopped at the bridge's edge, engine idling, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Either it holds or it doesn't. He eased the rig forward. The entire bridge shuddered under the weight, planks groaning like old bones. Halfway across, wind funneled through the canyon, making the trailer sway. The bridge swayed with it. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs. Through the windshield, he glimpsed locals on the far side making the sign of the cross, their faces tight with worry. In his mirror, a shaft of sunlight broke through the tarp, illuminating the Virgin's face. For one impossible moment, she seemed to glow, serene and unafraid, as if whispering, "Keep going." The final planks moaned as the truck reached solid ground. Behind him, a plank cracked and dropped into the river with a distant splash. Mike sat in his cab longer than necessary, hands trembling on the wheel. He'd driven thousands of dangerous miles, but this felt different. Protected, somehow. He couldn't shake the memory of the old woman's whispered words. Travel with this driver. Higher up the pass, the road twisted like a coiled snake between sheer cliffs. Mike kept both hands glued to the wheel, jaw clenched against the growing unease that something was watching him from beneath that tarp. Then came the sound, low at first like distant thunder. The steering wheel vibrated in his grip. Before he could identify it, the mountain answered. Crack. Boom. Boulders the size of refrigerators tore free from the cliff above, slamming onto the asphalt with bone-rattling force. Dust filled the air like smoke. Mike slammed the brakes, the rig screeching to a halt just yards from where a massive boulder crashed across the center line. Time froze. If he'd been 5 seconds faster, truck and statue would have been crushed under tons of stone. Holy! His voice caught in his throat, strangled by shock. A group of hikers scrambled down from the trail above. One waved frantically. Driver, stop right there. Any farther and you'd have been pancaked. Mike climbed out on shaking legs. The locals worked quickly, using crowbars to clear smaller rocks. But the massive boulder was immovable, wedged across half the lane. His only choice was to thread the needle, inches from the canyon's edge on one side, the giant rock on the other. Back in the cab, sweat dripped down his temples as he nudged the truck forward. The trailer creaked, chains groaning as the load shifted. Every nerve screamed that he was about to scrape the rock or tumble off the ledge. Then, miraculously, the final wheels rolled clear. He stopped, killed the engine, and sat in stunned silence. His hands shook as he stared at them. "Thank you," he whispered, surprising himself. "Whoever you are." The road plunged into a steep descent that made even seasoned truckers grip their wheels tighter. Mike downshifted, engine brakes growling as the rig began to crawl downhill. Guard rails appeared and disappeared, twisted from past wrecks. Below, the canyon yawned wide, a jagged mouth waiting to swallow anything that slipped. He whispered under his breath, "Easy now. Keep it steady." Then it happened. Mike pressed the brake pedal. It sank like wet clay, no resistance, no grip. The truck didn't slow. It sped up. "What the—" His voice cracked as he slammed the pedal again. Nothing. The same sickening give. The 18-wheeler roared down the mountain, momentum building. The statue's weight pushed from behind, thousands of pounds of marble turning his rig into a runaway missile. The curve ahead wasn't gentle. It was a horseshoe bend carved into the mountainside. Miss it and he'd rocket straight into open air. Panic surged through him like electricity. Images flashed. His daughter's graduation picture on his fridge, his father's funeral, promises he'd never made and words he'd never spoken. Mike gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned white. For the first time in his life, words he'd never thought he'd say tore from his throat. "Mary, if you're real, if you're anything at all, help me." Then it came. Not thunder, not a booming voice, just a whisper, gentle as a mother calming a frightened child. "Don't be afraid. Trust." Mike jerked his head around. The cab was empty. Just him, the wheel, and the blur of road racing past. But the words had been clear. Close. Too real to deny. Suddenly, the rig began to change. The tires screeched. Not in chaos, but in resistance, as if invisible hands pressed back against the runaway force. The trailer shuddered, slowing. The wheel fought in his hands, but he held on. The guardrail blurred inches from his mirror. The canyon gaped beyond. For an eternity, he balanced on the edge of a knife. Then, inch by impossible inch, the truck's momentum bled away. The rig ground to a halt just feet from where the road curved away from the cliff. Mike's chest heaved. He pressed his forehead against the wheel, slick with sweat, and for the first time in decades, wept. Before Mike could fully process what had happened, the mountain threw one more test at him. Clouds rolled in fast, bringing sheets of rain that turned the road into a gray blur. Then came fog so thick it seemed alive, swallowing the guardrails and hiding the cliff's edge. Mike leaned over the wheel, squinting into nothingness. His headlights bounced back uselessly. For all he knew, the truck could be inches from disaster. "Mary," he whispered, his voice raw, "if you're really there, I need you now." As if in answer, a glow appeared through the fog. Faint at first, like a lantern in the distance. The light grew steadier, warmer, cutting through the gray with impossible gentleness. At the center of the glow walked a figure, slender and graceful, cloaked in blue that shimmered like woven starlight. She moved silently on the wet pavement, never looking back, but leading with steady certainty as if the road beneath her feet were solid stone laid just for her. Mike's throat closed. His hands shook on the wheel. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't rain and fog playing tricks. He eased the truck forward, following the glow. Incredibly, the rig stayed true. The wheels gripped. The trailer stopped swaying. The fog pressed all around, but where she walked, the way was clear. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder rolled across the peaks. But inside the cab, Mike felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Peace. "Is this real?" he whispered. No answer came in words, but her presence was answer enough. The storm stretched on for miles or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning. It was just Mike, the truck, and the woman in blue leading the way. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the storm began to ease. The glow faded into the mist until it vanished. Mike gasped, leaning forward, desperate to hold onto the sight. "Wait, don't leave." But there was nothing, only the wet road gleaming in returning daylight. Yet something was different. The pavement ahead was bone dry, though rain had fallen everywhere else. It stretched like a golden path laid out just for him. Mike pulled onto the shoulder and sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered, and this time the words weren't born of panic. They were born of awe. As the truck descended into the valley, storm clouds broke apart and sunlight spilled across the mountains like liquid gold. The narrow pass widened into a paved road that curved toward a small town with red-tiled roofs and a whitewashed church whose bell tower gleamed in the afternoon sun. At first, Mike thought the gathering was a festival. Hundreds of people crowded the churchyard. Men in flannel shirts, women in bright shawls, children perched on shoulders. They waved banners painted with images of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Some held candles despite the daylight. Others clutched rosaries, lips moving in silent prayer. As soon as the truck came into view, the crowd erupted. "She's here. La Virgen ha legado." The words rolled across the valley like thunder, but this time it wasn't fear that shook Mike. It was joy, pure, overwhelming joy radiating from hundreds of faces. He slowed to a crawl, stunned. These weren't just parishioners. They were farmers, shopkeepers, families who had driven from neighboring towns or walked miles up the mountain. Every face shone with unshakable faith. As the truck rolled through the church gates, people surged forward. Some wept openly, pressing hands to the trailer sides. Others made the sign of the cross. A little girl with swinging braids touched the trailer gently and whispered, "Gracias, Mama Maria." Mike's throat tightened. He'd resisted emotion his whole life, but something about that child's pure gratitude shattered his defenses. Father Gabriel emerged from the crowd, his black cassock damp from earlier rain. He raised his hands for quiet, but his own voice trembled with emotion. "Brothers and sisters, she has arrived. Against every obstacle, every danger. She is here." The crowd cheered again, the sound making Mike's chest ache with unfamiliar warmth. In the quiet of the priest's rectory, away from the celebrating crowd, Mike found himself pouring out everything to Father Gabriel. The bridge that should have collapsed, the rockslide that missed him by seconds, the brakes that failed on the mountain, the voice in the storm. "I've been on the road 25 years, Mike said, his voice hoarse. "I've seen wrecks, fires, close calls, but nothing like today. I should have died out there, multiple times. And the only reason I can give." He looked toward the window where the statue now stood in the courtyard, surrounded by candles. "Is her." Father Gabriel leaned forward, listening without judgment. "And what did you hear?" Mike's voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't be afraid. Trust. That's all. Just that." His shoulders slumped. "I swear I heard her answer. I can't explain it, Father. I can't explain any of it." "You don't need to explain," the priest said gently. "Faith isn't a formula to solve. It's an encounter. And today you encountered her." Mike pressed his hands over his face. "But why me? I'm no believer. I've cursed God more times than I've thanked him. Why would she save me?" "Because grace isn't earned, Mike. It's given. God doesn't wait for perfect men. He meets us where we are, sometimes even behind the wheel of a truck barreling down a mountain. Tears Mike had held back for decades finally came, sliding down his weathered cheeks. "I don't even know how to pray," he admitted. "You already did," Father Gabriel smiled. "When you called her name, that was prayer. When you said, 'Help me,' that was prayer. And she heard you." That evening, as hundreds of candles flickered in the churchyard and the bell tower rang across the valley, Mike stood before the crowd. His hands shook as he gripped the microphone. "I'm no churchgoer," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I've lived 52 years without saying a single prayer. But out there on those roads something happened. More than once I should have been dead. When the brakes failed, when the storm swallowed the road, I was finished." He glanced at the Virgin's face, glowing in the candlelight. "But I'm here, and the only reason I can give is her." His voice cracked. "When I called her name," she answered. Not with thunder, not with lightning, just a whisper. "Don't be afraid. Trust." And somehow that was enough. The crowd held its breath. Many wept openly. "I don't know what comes next," Mike continued. "But I know this. From now on, I'll never believe I drive alone." Applause filled the mountain air. Not wild, but reverent, grateful. Mike stepped back, overwhelmed but changed forever. Later, as the candles burned low and the bells rang one last time, Mike knelt quietly at the base of the statue. No one noticed. No one needed to. It wasn't for them. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saving me, for showing me I'm not alone." He stood, eyes clear despite the tears, and stepped back into the crowd. For the first time in his life, Mike Anderson felt not like a drifter on endless roads, but like a man who had finally found his way home. The long road home, the return journey felt different. Mike's hands rested lighter on the wheel. His shoulders relaxed despite the same treacherous mountain roads. The trailer was empty now, but somehow he felt less alone than he had in years. At truck stops, he found himself nodding to the small shrines some drivers kept on their dashboards. Plastic saints and prayer cards he'd once dismissed as superstition. Now they seemed like old friends waving hello. His CB radio crackled with the usual chatter. Traffic reports, weather warnings, the rough camaraderie of the road. But when a young driver came on, voice tight with panic about brake problems on a steep grade, Mike found himself keying the mic. "Braker, son. Take it easy. You're not alone out there. Someone's watching over you. Copy that, good buddy. Thanks for the words." Mike smiled, remembering another voice that had whispered those same assurances to him. "Don't be afraid. Trust." When he reached his small apartment in Denver 3 days later, Mike did something he'd never done before. He found a small picture of the Virgin Mary at a gas station gift shop. Nothing fancy, just a simple prayer card. He taped it to his dashboard where he could see her gentle eyes every day. His daughter called that weekend. "Dad, you sound different. Happy. Almost." Mike chuckled, looking out his window at the mountains. "Maybe I am, sweetheart. Maybe I finally learned something about faith." "Faith? You?" "Turns out it was there all along. I just needed someone to show me where to look." As he settled into his recliner that night, Mike felt the deep, restful peace of a man who had been found rather than lost. Outside, Denver's lights twinkled like earthbound stars. But in his heart, he carried a different light, the memory of a figure in blue walking through fog, leading him safely home. Let Mike's journey remind you that grace often comes disguised as ordinary moments on ordinary roads. As you drift towards sleep, know that you too are never truly alone on life's highways. Rest now in that gentle truth. If the story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to know that miracles still happen on the highways of faith. Sometimes salvation comes not with trumpets, but with whispers in the storm.